You are not strange, you are just deep in a world that fears depth. Most people swim in the shallow end of thought, but some, they dive into oceans others fear to touch. If the world has never understood you, it might not be because you're broken. It might be because you're rare. 1. You think in symbols, not slogans. You see layers where others see lines. While others speak in facts, you speak in patterns. To you, the moon isn't just the moon, it's a mirror of the unconscious. 2. You are magnetized by solitude, not because you hate people, but because silence speaks in a frequency your mind needs. You feel more alive in reflection than in reaction. 3. You question everything, even yourself. You dismantle your beliefs like old furniture just to see how they're built. Truth matters more than comfort. Comfort can be bought. Truth must be earned. 4. You feel the weight of emotions that aren't yours. Not because you're weak, but because you're permeable. You carry empathy like a second skin. You don't just understand people, you absorb them. 5. You are drawn to the shadow, not for darkness, but for wholeness. You've met your fears face and named them. Others avoid pain. You ask it to teach you. 6. You speak less but mean more. You don't chase attention, you create resonance. When you speak, it echoes. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. 7. You see time differently. You don't rush, you unfold. The world tells you to hustle, but your mind whispers, grow slow, grow deep. 8. You don't need to be understood to be at peace. You've stopped explaining yourself to the unready. You've learned that understanding is not owed, it's earned. And if you recognize yourself in these words, know this, you are not alone in your isolation. You are simply ahead of your time, and time always catches up. The world may not get you yet, but the mind that sees behind the veil, the soul that feels what others deny, and the heart that dares to dive deep, these are the minds that build new worlds. Stay deep, stay strange, stay real, because the truth is only 1% will understand, but the other 99%, one day they will thank you, not because you chose to, but because your mind was never built for the surface. Others look at the world and see objects. You look at the world and feel meanings. You walk into a room and you don't just see chairs and people, you sense energy, tension, stories untold. You look at a tree and don't just see wood. You see growth, you see time, you see life stretching toward light despite gravity's pull. While the world moves fast, you move deep. You pause where others scroll. You observe where others react. And that difference is not always welcome. People call you too intense, too much, overthinker, but you're not overthinking, you're seeing what they can't see. To most, a dream is just a byproduct of sleep. To you, a dream is a message in code. You wake up not to forget it, but to interpret it, because you know the unconscious speaks in images and symbols are the language of the soul. While others chase logic, you're drawn to the irrational not because it's chaotic, but because it holds truth logic can't touch. You know that not everything meaningful can be measured, not everything sacred fits inside a spreadsheet. People want clarity, you want depth, they want yes or no. You ask, what does it mean? Your thoughts don't come in straight lines. They spiral, they layer, they echo, and sometimes even you struggle to explain what you see. It's not because you don't know, it's because language was not built for minds like yours. How do you describe the feeling of remembering something you've never lived? How do you put into words the emotion of watching the sun set and feeling like it's telling you a secret only your soul understands? That's the loneliness of symbolic thinking. Not many can follow. Even fewer can sit with the discomfort of ambiguity. But ambiguity is your native terrain. You don't fear paradox. You are at home in it. You understand that two truths can exist at once. You can be both strong and breaking. You can love someone and know they're wrong for you. You can believe in fate and still take responsibility. This is not confusion. This is complexity, and complexity is misunderstood because people want slogans, simple, digestible, fast, good vibes only, live your truth, let it go. But those phrases bounce off you, they feel too thin for the weight you carry. You're not wired for superficial mantras. You want reality. You want the raw, the messy, the whole. You crave what lives beneath the polished surface, the archetype behind the character, the wound behind the mask, the truth behind the performance. When you speak, it confuses people, not because you're unclear, but because you're speaking from a layer they haven't yet accessed. You say things like, "There's a sadness in his eyes he doesn't know he's carrying." Or, "She's laughing, but I feel a storm behind it." To some, that's poetry. To you, that's just perception. It's not dramatic, it's data, just deeper data, spiritual data, emotional data, symbolic information. And you've learned something important. Most people are not equipped to decode that level of reality. So, you stay quiet sometimes, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know they're not ready to hear it. Still you observe, still you reflect, still you keep digging through layers others pretend aren't there, and eventually you see something even rarer, that everything is symbolic and nothing is random. That the argument wasn't just about the dishes, it was about respect, about resentment, about childhood wounds. That the job you lost wasn't a failure, it was your psyche's way of pulling you toward a deeper purpose. Others dismiss these patterns. You live by them, because once you start seeing the world through symbols, you can't go back. You stop living at the surface. You stop needing permission to feel deeply. And you start living in alignment with something bigger, something unseen, but unmistakably real, because you think in symbols, not slogans, and that is not weakness. That is a mind tuned to the hidden architecture of truth. And because your mind thinks in symbols, you need space, not just physical distance, but psychic silence. Where others fill the void with noise, you retreat into it, not to escape life, but to listen to it more closely. You are magnetized by solitude, because that's the only place your inner world stops whispering and starts speaking clearly. For most, silence is emptiness. For you, silence is a container, a sacred space. An uncarved block, not absence but presence in its purest form. You don't isolate to disconnect. You isolate to reconnect with yourself, with the patterns you saw earlier but couldn't name, with the dreams that tried to tell you something while you were too busy surviving. You go inward, not because you're broken, but because that's where the roots grow. And you know, no tree reaches the heavens unless its roots touch hell. But people don't understand this. They confuse solitude with loneliness. They call you distant, withdrawn, cold. What they don't see is that while they're running from themselves, you are sitting with your shadows. While they avoid their wounds, you study yours like a map. Alone does not mean lost. For you, it means found. And it's in that stillness, when the world quiets, that something sacred begins to move. Thoughts align. Feelings rise to the surface. Truths you buried begin to knock. You journal not for productivity, but for excavation. You take long walks without music, because even the sound of your breath feels like a prayer. You turn off your phone, not because you're antisocial, but because you can't hear your soul over notifications. Others go out to feel alive. You go inward to remember you never stopped being. And here's the strange part. You crave people, but only when they're real. Only when their presence doesn't crowd your being. Only when they can sit with you in silence and not feel the urge to fill it. Because your solitude has taught you that some company costs too much. That peace is more precious than attention. That not everyone who smiles wants your good. And not everyone who listens hears. So you stopped needing to be constantly seen. You stopped chasing validation. You learned to validate yourself in the sanctuary of your solitude. And yes, it can feel like exile. There are days the silence feels too loud, and your own mind feels like a storm you can't calm. But you know better now. You've walked through that storm before. You've cried in rooms no one saw, and come out with eyes that see clearer. And that's the cost of having a rare mind, a mind not meant to be crowded, a soul not meant to be diluted. So when others fear being alone, you find power in it, not because you want to be separate, but because you've learned you can't merge with the world until you've merged with yourself. You've sat with your confusion until it gave you clarity. You've sat with your heartbreak until it showed you its origin story. You've sat with your shame until it lost its grip. That's why your solitude is not just preference. It's ritual, it's medicine, it's rebellion, because in a world addicted to stimulation, your silence is a revolution, and when you return from solitude, when you choose to re-engage, you bring back something most have lost, an undistorted sense of self. A quiet confidence, a presence not borrowed from applause, a power not tied to performance. You are magnetized by solitude because it reminds you, you are already whole. You are already home, and no amount of company can replace the sanctuary you've built within. And maybe it was solitude that taught you this, that the most vivid things you've ever experienced didn't come from outside. They came from within, because the more time you spend alone, the more you realize the outer world is loud, but the inner world is alive. There's color inside your silence. There's sound inside your stillness. There's movement in the places you've never even spoken about. While others chase external events, you explore internal landscapes. They ask what's next, you ask what's underneath, and that shift, that simple reversal of attention changes everything. You begin to notice how the outer world lies, how people smile while hiding grief, how success is often a mask for insecurity, how crowds can be the loneliest places, but the inner world, it doesn't lie. It whispers truths you've buried. It shows you patterns you tried to ignore. It holds your memories without judgment. And it reminds you constantly, this is who you really are. You begin to realize that the most significant conversations you've ever had happened in silence between you and your intuition, you and your fear, you and that small, persistent voice that said, something about this life is not enough. You start to trust it. That inner compass, that quiet knowing, even when it makes no logical sense, because you've seen what happens when you ignore it, the burnout, the breakdowns, the choices that look good on paper but feel like betrayal in the gut. So you start choosing differently, not based on what's trending but based on what resonates, not based on what they want but what your soul refuses to compromise, and yes, it sets you apart. You stop following the map everyone else is using. Because your path doesn't exist yet. It's not printed, it's not visible, it unfolds from within. Every choice you make pulls from a deeper source, and that depth often looks like disobedience, like rebellion, like risk, because when you're guided from within, you don't need constant approval, you need alignment, you don't need applause, you need peace. People tell you, be realistic, but their version of realism is external. It's based on systems, metrics, and expectations built by people who never asked what you feel. But your realism is internal. You measure things by resonance. You weigh them by truth. If it costs your peace, it's too expensive. If it numbs your spirit, it's not success. If it contradicts your soul, you walk away even if it looks perfect, because no outer achievement can substitute for inner harmony. You've learned this the hard way by chasing things that made you look full but feel empty. By winning battles that left your heart tired, by living stories that didn't belong to you. Now you live differently. You prioritize energy over image. You honor instinct over opinion. You trust feeling more than formula. Because you've seen the truth, the outer world is shaped by the inner world, not the other way around. Your mind is not a mirror of society. It's a vessel of original insight. Your heart is not a reaction to circumstance. It's a compass. It tells you where the real you still lives, and when the noise gets too loud, when the world tries to pull you back into performance, into pleasing, you close your eyes and you go inward. Because that's where your real answers live, not in charts, not in trends, not in the opinions of those who barely know themselves. They live in that place no one else can access, the cave of your own psyche. The mountain of your own clarity, the river of your own memory. This is why you seem different, why you make decisions others don't understand, why you say no to things they'd kill for. It's because your inner world has become your home. And once you taste that kind of alignment, nothing external can tempt you into exile, not just beauty, but shadow, not just light, but darkness your own. You start to realize you are not only the thoughts you curate, the kindness you show, the strength you display. You are also what you hide, you are also what you suppress, you are also what you deny, and that part is real, too, you feel it. When someone praises you, but a voice in the back of your mind whispers, if they knew the whole you, they wouldn't say that. That voice. It isn't weakness, it's a call to turn around and look at what you've buried, to face the shame you've dressed as humility, to face the rage you've disguised as patience, to face the fear you've been masking with control. Most people run from that part of themselves, but you didn't, because you know you can't heal what you refuse to meet. You stopped pretending you're only made of light. You realized that wholeness isn't purity, it's honesty. And honesty means sitting with your shadow without judgment, without escape, without flinching. You looked into yourself and saw contradiction. You saw the part of you that wants to help and the part that wants revenge. The part that forgives and the part that keeps score, the part that loves and the part that fears losing control, and instead of cutting it out, you got curious. You asked, what are you trying to protect? You asked, what pain did you grow from? Because you realized the shadow isn't evil. It's wounded, it's your younger self, still carrying unmet needs and unspoken truths. You stopped moralizing your emotions, stopped calling anger bad, stopped calling sadness weak. You began to listen. To your envy, to your guilt, to your pride, you let them speak, and they told you stories that were never allowed to be told. You saw how your anger was your boundary screaming. You saw how your guilt was a distortion of loyalty. You saw how your silence wasn't peace, it was fear. And in doing that, in naming your shadow instead of exiling it, you became whole, not perfect, not clean, but real and emotionally complex, because you no longer judge yourself in halves. You don't only love your light and reject your dark, you hold both, you carry the paradox. That's why you understand people in ways others can't. You've met your own darkness, so you don't flinch when you see it in others. You can sit with someone in their grief without trying to fix it. You can witness someone's rage without shrinking. You can hold someone's truth even when it contradicts your own, because you've made room inside yourself, and it makes you hard to define. You don't fit into neat boxes. You can be kind and have sharp edges. You can be soft and carry fire. You can love people and still walk away when they cross your line. This depth unnerves others because people want you to be simple, predictable, understandable, but you're not. You've integrated the parts of yourself they're still running from, and so your presence confronts them. Not because you say anything, but because wholeness in a fragmented world feels disruptive. But you no longer apologize for your wholeness, because now you know what you've faced cannot be unfaced. And what you've accepted can never again control you from the shadows. So while others polish their image, you protect your truth. While others perfect their mask, you nurture your roots, because you didn't come here to be liked. You came here to be real, and real people carry shadow, but they carry it with awareness, and that awareness, that is freedom. And once you've made peace with your shadow, something irreversible happens. You stop needing to be seen a certain way. You stop trying to be easy to digest, because when you know the full spectrum of who you are, approval loses its grip, fitting in feels small, the masks start to itch. You no longer ask, do they like me? You ask, is this real? Is this honest? Is this aligned? That shift from being liked to being real is where most people stop walking with you, because they don't understand that you'd rather lose people than lose yourself. They thought your silence was passivity. They didn't know it was discernment. They thought your distance was arrogance. They didn't know it was protection. They thought your honesty was rebellion. They didn't know it was integrity. You do not seek to be agreeable, you seek to be true, and that makes people uncomfortable, because the world trains us to perform, to adapt, to keep peace at the cost of our truth. You stopped performing. You stopped nodding to things that made your soul twitch. You stopped shrinking so others could feel tall. You speak when it's hard. You stay quiet when it's easy to join the noise. You walk away when staying would mean betraying your values. It's not that you want to be different, it's that you can no longer pretend. Once you've integrated your shadow, you see how often people trade truth for acceptance, how they abandon their inner voice to match the outer tone. How they wear borrowed personalities because their real one feels too risky to reveal. You've been there. You know what it's like to hold your truth in your throat like a burning stone, to stay in rooms that drain you just to avoid conflict, to laugh at things that offend your being just to belong. But now you know that pretending is a slow death, that approval without authenticity is just exile with applause, so you stopped asking for permission. You started giving yourself the space to not be understood. You understand now that truth has a cost, but so does silence, so does people pleasing, so does the performance of always being agreeable. And when you weigh the cost of truth against the cost of self-abandonment, there's no contest. You pick truth, even if your voice shakes, even if the room goes quiet, even if people leave, because the ones who stay, they see the real you. And that's worth more than a crowd clapping for a mask. You don't argue for the sake of being right. You speak to stay whole. You question not to be difficult, but because unasked questions become internal wars. You're not here to conform, you're here to witness, to feel, to live without distortion, and that sometimes means standing alone in a room full of consensus, not to be stubborn but to stay aligned. Because now you know, agreement is not the same as connection, fitting in is not the same as belonging, being liked is not the same as being seen. You'd rather be misunderstood for your truth than adored for your mask. You'd rather stand in your solitude than sit in circles where your silence is survival. And when you speak, it's not to convince, it's to declare, not because you need to be right, but because you refuse to be false. So when the world says, be more palatable, you say, I wasn't made to be swallowed, I was made to be real. When it says, don't rock the boat, you say, I am the storm that reminds the boat it floats on deeper waters. You know now, fitting in is easy. But truth is freedom, and that's what you've chosen every time.